This girl reveals an incredible secret to a millionaire's son who couldn't walk, and a miracle happens. Comment giving my story a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The scream sliced through the stuffy afternoon air like a knife, echoing through the cobblestone streets of the historic town at exactly 3 in the afternoon. The widowed millionaire, 52 years old, almost knocked over his coffee cup as he moved away from the window of his luxury apartment. It was always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity. For 3 weeks in a row, that sound had been coming from the brownstone across the street, a faded yellow 2-story building with peeling blue window frames that contrasted sharply with the modern elegance of his building. His fortune, amassed through investments in stocks and Wall Street applications, allowed him to live comfortably in one of the most desirable locations in the area. But no amount of wealth could silence those screams that disturbed his afternoons. "Must be a kid throwing a tantrum," he muttered to himself, adjusting his tie before returning to work. As the owner of the largest construction company in the region, he was accustomed to solving complex problems, but he preferred to keep his distance from other people's dramas. Especially after 5 years of living alone, ever since he lost his wife on a rainy night he preferred not to remember. Across the street, inside the brownstone, the 4-year-old girl huddled in the corner of the kitchen, her age insufficient to understand why her aunt hated her so much. The 38-year-old woman held firmly a metal spoon that she had heated on the gas stove, her eyes red from the booze fixed on the child, trembling before her. "You're a plague on this house," hissed the cruel aunt, her voice slurred from the cheap whiskey she'd been drinking since noon at the local dive bar. "Because of you, my sister is gone. Because of you, I lost everything." The spoon came down hard on the girl's small arm, leaving a red mark that would join the other scars that dotted her thin arms. The child bit her lip to avoid screaming louder. She had learned that screams only enraged her aunt more, who had worked at City Hall until she was fired for constant absences caused by her addiction. The girl closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's soft voice, singing that song before she went to sleep. It was all that was left of her now, fragments of memories and a melody that insisted on echoing in her mind during the most painful moments. "Stop whining," grunted the aunt, putting the spoon back in the drawer as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. "Go to your room, and I don't want to see you until tomorrow. And if you smudge the walls again with that filthy charcoal, you'll see what real punishment is." The girl ran to the small room at the back of the house, a stuffy space with an old bed and a crucifix on the wall. There, she curled up under the thin sheet and began to hum her mother's song softly, the only thing that still consoled her. She didn't know that, across the street, someone had finally paid attention to that melody. The businessman stopped reviewing the contracts when he heard the faint but distinct sound. He knew that song. His wife used to sing it when she cooked, a popular tune that spoke about free birds. But where was it coming from? He approached the window again, his eyes scanning the facade of the brownstone. One of the back windows was ajar, and from there came that childish voice, shaky but persistent. For the first time in 3 weeks, he felt something other than simple annoyance. There was something in that voice that struck a sensitive chord in his chest, something that reminded him of responsibilities long buried under layers of work and isolation. His net worth in dollars seemed endless, but no wealth could fill the void he carried since his wife's passing. Next door to the brownstone, the 61-year-old retired teacher was watering her begonias when she heard the girl singing. Unlike the millionaire, she could no longer ignore the signs. During her 40 years teaching in elementary school, she had developed a sixth sense for children in distress. "That's strange," she thought, watching the windows of the neighboring house, a family she had known for decades. The aunt had always been problematic, but since she took custody of her orphaned niece, something had changed in the air of that house. The girl never played in the yard, never ran through the streets like the other children in the historic town. The teacher dried her hands on her apron and made a decision. The next morning, she would pay a courtesy visit to her neighbor. It had been a long time since she had properly talked to the aunt, and maybe it was time to get to know the little girl better. Meanwhile, the millionaire remained at the window, an uncomfortable feeling growing in his chest. The music had stopped, but something in those few minutes had awakened memories that he preferred to keep dormant. Memories of a former employee who had resigned abruptly 5 years ago, a few months before the accident. She was a kind woman, always humming while organizing the construction company's files. Then, suddenly, she had simply disappeared from his life, leaving only a formal resignation letter and many unanswered questions. He had never thought of her again, until he heard that familiar song echoing from a house where a child seemed to suffer in silence. The sun began to set over the mountains that surrounded the town when the girl finally fell asleep, exhausted by pain and fear. Across the street, the businessman closed the curtains and tried to return to work, but he couldn't concentrate. Something had changed that afternoon, something he didn't yet fully understand. For the first time in years, he felt that maybe it was time to pay attention to what was happening beyond his own windows. The next morning brought with it the aroma of fresh bread from the local bakeries and the typical hustle and bustle of the historic town waking up to another day. The retired teacher put on her best floral dress and combed her grey hair with extra care. There was something in that child's voice that wouldn't leave her in peace, an echo of hopelessness that she recognized from her years as an educator. At 9 o'clock sharp, she knocked on the door of the brownstone. The sound echoed through the silent interior until shuffling footsteps approached. The aunt opened the door with a puffy face and red eyes, clearly suffering the effects of the previous night's drinking. "Good morning," said the teacher with her gentlest smile. "I came to pay a courtesy visit. It's been so long since we've had a proper chat." The aunt hesitated, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "Oh, teacher, it's not a good time. The house is a mess." "Nonsense, dear. We've been neighbors for so long." The teacher took a step forward, forcing the aunt to back away. "And I'd love to meet your niece. I've heard she's an adorable little girl." The aunt's face hardened for a moment before forcing a strained smile. "The girl is sick. High fever, better not get close." At that moment, a soft noise came from the kitchen, the sound of something being dragged on the floor. The teacher pricked up her ears, immediately recognizing the sound of a child trying to move silently. "Maybe I can help," insisted the educator. "I have experience with sick children. I raised 3 kids, you know how it is." "No need, no," the aunt replied quickly, blocking the entrance with her body. "I already took her to the doctor, it's just a cold. It'll pass soon." The teacher noticed the aunt's nervous hands, the way she avoided eye contact, and especially the strong smell of alcohol emanating from her, even though it was so early. All the signs that she had learned to recognize during decades of dealing with troubled families. Across the street, the millionaire watched the scene from his window while having breakfast. He had woken up earlier than usual, disturbed by confusing dreams where a child's voice mixed with memories of the former employee. When he saw the teacher at the door of the brownstone, a strange curiosity washed over him. The educator finally said goodbye to the aunt, but not without casting an investigative look into the house. There was something deeply wrong there, and her experience told her that a child was suffering. As she walked back to her house, she decided that she needed to find a way to verify her suspicions. Inside the brownstone, the aunt slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl crouched behind the table, trying to hide. The child had tried to reach a glass of water from the sink, but her height didn't allow it, and she had knocked over a chair in the process. "Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" growled the aunt, her irritation intensified by the hangover and the unexpected visit. "I was thirsty," murmured the girl, her big eyes fixed on the floor. Thirsty? The aunt laughed bitterly. You want water? Then go get it in the backyard. And since you like to make so much noise, you can stay out there until I decide you can come in. The girl went out to the small backyard, a space surrounded by high walls and dominated by a single apple tree. There, she sat on the ground and began to draw with a piece of charcoal that she had found near the gas stove. They were always birds, small, large, some flying, others perched on imaginary branches. Each stroke represented her dream of freedom, of flying away from that house where pain was her only constant companion. The hours passed slowly. The aunt had locked the back door, leaving the girl in the yard under the hot midday sun. The child began to feel dizzy, but she knew that knocking on the door would only result in more punishment. So, she began to softly sing her mother's song, the melody being her only source of comfort. It was this melody that reached the businessman's ears again. This time, he couldn't ignore it. There was something too familiar in that voice, in that specific song. He picked up his cell phone and, almost without thinking, began to record. He didn't know exactly why, but an instinct told him that he might need that evidence. As he recorded, fragments of memories began to fit together in his mind. The employee used to hum that same song while she worked. She, who had been an exemplary employee until she disappeared abruptly. She who always spoke fondly about her young daughter, a girl named... That was the name, murmured the millionaire, his cell phone shaking in his hands. The daughter of the former employee was named exactly like the child who was now suffering across the street. The realization hit him like a punch in the stomach. The child suffering in the house across the street was the daughter of his former employee, the kind woman who had worked for him for 3 years before simply disappearing. How hadn't he made this connection before? The businessman put away his cell phone and began to pace back and forth in his apartment. He vaguely remembered the employee mentioning family problems, a sister she didn't get along with, financial difficulties. But he was so absorbed in his own problems at the time, the growing conflicts with his wife, the problems in the company, that he hadn't paid due attention. Now, 5 years later, the daughter of his former employee was across the street, and from the sounds that came from that house, she wasn't in a good situation. The guilt he carried for the loss of his wife multiplied, now including the regret of not having helped when she clearly needed it. At 3 in the afternoon, promptly, the screams started again. This time, the millionaire didn't move away from the window. He watched with growing horror as, through the kitchen window of the brownstone, he saw a female silhouette moving aggressively. He picked up his cell phone again and began to record, this time with more determination. What he saw through the cell phone screen made him nauseous. The aunt was holding something in her hands. It seemed to be a kitchen utensil, and gesturing violently towards a small figure that he could barely distinguish. The girl's screams echoed through the afternoon, and this time the businessman couldn't pretend they were just childish tantrums. His wealth, his investments in funds and applications, all his net worth seemed insignificant in the face of the impotence he felt at that moment. When the silence returned, he remained at the window for a few more minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just witnessed something that would change everything. The question now was, what would he do with that information? That night, the girl slept on the floor of the backyard, where the aunt had left her as punishment for making too much noise during the afternoon. The child curled up in her own t-shirt and looked at the stars through the branches of the apple tree. In her 4-year-old mind, she made a silent wish to her mother, wherever she was, that someone, anyone, would take her away from that place of pain. Across the street, the millionaire couldn't sleep, tormented by the certainty that he needed to act, but paralyzed by the same emotional inertia that had consumed him since his wife's passing. 3 days had passed since the businessman discovered the child's identity, and the guilt consumed him like a slow fire. During those days, He had systematically documented the episodes of violence, always at 3 in the afternoon, always with the same methodical brutality. His collection of videos and audios grew, but his courage to act remained paralyzed by the same cowardice that had haunted him since the night he lost his wife. On that Thursday morning, the teacher made a decision that would change the course of everything. She had spent the night awake, tormented by the certainty that a child was suffering a few meters from her house. Her 4 decades as an educator had taught her to recognize the signs, and they were all present in the brownstone. She decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of trying a new direct visit to the aunt, she opted for a more subtle strategy. At 7 in the morning, she positioned herself in the side yard of her house, the place from where she had the best view of the backyard of the brownstone. What she saw horrified her. The girl was sitting under the apple tree, completely alone, wearing only a ripped t-shirt and underwear. Her small arms were marked by obvious burns, some still red and inflamed. The child was drawing in the ground with a piece of charcoal, creating shapes that the teacher recognized as birds. "My God," whispered the educator, her hands trembling as she gripped the fence separating the yards. It was worse than she imagined, much worse. The girl looked up and saw the lady watching her. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. Then, to the teacher's surprise, the child smiled. A weak but genuine smile, and waved shyly. "Hi, Grandma," said the girl with her tiny voice, using the affectionate term she gave to all elderly ladies. "Hi, sweetheart," replied the teacher, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Are you all right?" The girl glanced quickly at the windows of the house before answering. "I am, yes. I'm just drawing birdies." "How nice. Do you like birds?" "I like them a lot. They can fly wherever they want," replied the child, her big eyes shining with a sadness that broke the teacher's heart. At that moment, the aunt's rough voice echoed from inside the house. "Where are you, girl?" The terror that instantly took over the child's face said everything the teacher needed to know. The girl got up quickly, wiped her hands on her t-shirt, and ran into the house, but not before looking once more at the educator with an expression that screamed for help. The teacher remained in the yard for a few more minutes, processing what she had seen. The burns, the fear, the way the child reacted to the aunt's voice, everything confirmed her worst fears. She could no longer pretend she didn't know what was happening. Meanwhile, across the street, the millionaire had witnessed the entire interaction. Through his window, he could see the yard partially, and the sight of the marks on the girl's arms made him nauseous. For the first time in 5 years, he felt a genuine fury burning in his chest. The former employee had trusted him in some way, even if indirectly, even if he didn't know at the time. She had left her daughter in the care of a family that lived in the same town where he lived, and now this child was being tortured while he watched from his comfortable window, paralyzed by his own cowardice. At 11 in the morning, the teacher made a courageous decision. She put on her best business suit, picked up a tray with homemade cookies that she had prepared as a pretext, and headed again to the brownstone. This time, she wouldn't take no for an answer. The aunt answered the door reluctantly, clearly irritated with the neighbor's insistence. "Teacher, I already told you that it's not a good time." "Honey, I brought some cookies that I made yesterday," interrupted the educator firmly. "And I insist on getting to know the little one better. As old neighbors, it's our duty to support each other." Before the aunt could protest, the teacher had already entered the house, using all the authority that decades of classroom had given her. The interior of the brownstone was dark and smelled of mildew mixed with alcohol. Old and poorly maintained furniture occupied the living room, and there was a heavy atmosphere that made the air seem difficult to breathe. "The girl is sleeping," lied the aunt, blocking the way to the back of the house. "What a shame. Maybe another time then," said the teacher, but her experienced eyes had already catalogued several disturbing details. dark stains on the kitchen floor that seemed to have been poorly cleaned, a metal spoon left on the gas stove, and especially small charcoal drawings on the walls that had clearly been made by a child. At that moment, a low sound came from the direction of the kitchen, a muffled sob, almost imperceptible. The teacher and the aunt froze. The silence that followed was tense and revealing. "It must be the neighbor's cat," said the aunt quickly, but her voice trembled slightly. The teacher smiled and nodded, but had decided that she had already seen enough. "Well, I'll let you rest then. But remember that I'm always here next door if you need anything." Anything at all. The educator's tone made it clear that it wasn't just a casual offer of help. It was a subtle but direct warning. After the teacher left, the aunt slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl huddled behind the gas stove, trying to hide. The child had cried upon hearing the teacher's gentle voice, remembering the kindness she had once known. "You were making noise," accused the aunt, her eyes already gleaming with the familiar fury. "No, I didn't make noise," protested the girl, but her small voice sounded weak even to her. The aunt picked up the metal spoon that was on the stove and placed it directly in the flame. The girl recognized the ritual and began to tremble. She knew what was coming next. "You want to attract attention, don't you?" hissed the aunt while the spoon heated up. "You want the neighbors to come here asking questions? You think I don't know how to take care of you?" Across the street, the millionaire had positioned his cell phone on the window and was recording again. This time, he managed to capture not only the sounds, but also partial images through the kitchen window. What he saw made him make a decision that would change everything. He could no longer be just a silent observer. The former employee had been a good person, a dedicated employee who always spoke of her daughter with love. This child was his responsibility now, whether he wanted to or not. All his capital, his dividends and interests, his investments in investment funds, none of that was worth it if he couldn't protect an innocent child. While the girl suffered another episode of systematic torture, the businessman made a call that he hadn't made in months. He called his personal lawyer and old college friend. "I need your help with a delicate situation," he said, watching through the window as the girl's screams echoed through the afternoon. "It's about a child, and I think it may be a matter of life." That night, after the aunt fell asleep drunk on the living room sofa, the girl managed to silently slip out to the backyard. Her new burns stung, but the physical pain was less than the pain in her heart. She sat under the apple tree and looked at the stars, humming her mother's song softly. What she didn't know was that, for the first time in months, someone was truly paying attention to her suffering, and that, in the coming days, her life would change in ways she couldn't even imagine. Across the street, the millionaire remained awake, his hands trembling as he organized the evidence he had collected, knowing that the time had finally come to act. The lawyer arrived at the millionaire's apartment on Friday morning with a serious expression on his face. The two men had been colleagues at university almost 3 decades ago, and the professional knew well the emotional isolation that his friend had built after the loss of his wife. Therefore, the urgent phone call the previous night had surprised him so much. "I need you to tell me exactly what is going on," said the lawyer, sitting down in the spacious living room of the apartment. "You spoke about a child in danger, but I need details." The businessman poured coffee and positioned himself next to the window, the place that had become his obsession in recent days. "The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine. She is being mistreated by the aunt who takes care of her." "Mistreated how?" asked the lawyer, taking a notepad from his briefcase. "Burns, daily screams, neglect." The millionaire paused, struggling with the words. "I have recordings, evidence of what is happening." The lawyer was silent for a moment, processing the information. "This is very serious. If you have evidence of child abuse, you need to contact Child Protective Services immediately." "I know," replied the businessman, running his hands over his face. But there's something more. The employee worked for me for 3 years. She left abruptly in 2019, a few months before the accident. I never understood why, but now you feel responsible, completed the lawyer, understanding the emotional complexity of the situation. The millionaire nodded. If I had paid more attention at the time, maybe I could have helped. Maybe she wouldn't have needed to leave her daughter with that woman. At that moment, the familiar sound of screams echoed from the house across the street, even though it was only 9 in the morning. Both men turned to the window, and the lawyer could see the expression of anguish on his friend's face. "This happens every day?" he asked, horrified. "At 3 in the afternoon, religiously. But sometimes at other times too," replied the businessman, picking up his cell phone. "Do you want to see the recordings?" The lawyer watched the videos in growing silence, his face paling with each scene. As an expert in family law, he had seen many cases of child abuse, but something in the systematization of that violence disturbed him deeply. "We can't wait any longer. I need you to give me all these recordings right now. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services and the district attorney's office. This child needs to be removed from that house immediately." While the two men planned the intervention, across the street, the girl was living another day of terror. The aunt had woken up with a particularly severe hangover and discovered that there was no more alcohol in the house. Her irritation multiplied when she found new drawings of birds that the child had made on the kitchen wall during the early morning. "How many times do I have to tell you not to smudge the walls?" screamed the aunt, holding the girl by the arm with enough force to leave marks. "You're a plague, a curse on this house." The girl tried to explain herself, to say that she had dreamed of her mother and that the drawings made her feel less alone, but the words were lost in sobs. At 4 years old, she still didn't completely understand why her aunt hated her so much, why each day brought new pain. "You're going to stay locked in the room until I decide what to do with you," continued the aunt, pushing the child down the hall. "And if I hear even a single noise, you'll know a punishment that you've never experienced before." The room where the girl was locked was small and stuffy, with only a high window that she couldn't reach. There she curled up in the corner and began to softly sing her mother's song, the melody being her only source of comfort in a world that seemed to have forgotten she existed. It was this song that the teacher heard when she passed by the house on her way to the grocery store. The educator had spent the entire night thinking about the conversation with the girl in the yard, the marks she had seen on the child's arms, the atmosphere of fear that permeated that house. The teacher stopped in front of the gate and listened. The girl's voice was weak, but loaded with a sadness that broke the educator's heart. At that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to the grocery store, she went directly to the downtown historic town, where the small office of Child Protective Services was located. She knew the counselor well, a former student of hers who had dedicated herself to the protection of vulnerable children. "I need to talk to you about a very serious situation," said the teacher, entering the office without ceremony. The counselor looked up from the papers she was analyzing. "Teacher, how nice to see you. What brings you here today?" "A child in danger. My neighbor. I'm sure she's being mistreated." The counselor straightened up in her chair, her expression becoming immediately serious. During her 5 years in office, she had learned to recognize when a complaint was serious, and the teacher wasn't the type of person who would make frivolous accusations. "Tell me everything," said the counselor, picking up a complaint form. While the teacher reported her observations on the other side of the town, the lawyer was in a similar meeting at the district attorney's office. The prosecutor listened attentively while the lawyer presented the evidence collected by the businessman. "This is compelling evidence," said the prosecutor, examining the videos on the lawyer's cell phone. "I'm going to order an immediate investigation and request the removal of the child from the family environment." "How long will this take?" asked the lawyer, concerned. "With this evidence? We can act today," replied the prosecutor. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services now. Thus, by a coincidence that would change the girl's fate, two simultaneous complaints arrived at Child Protective Services on the same morning. The counselor was finishing writing down the teacher's account when her phone rang. Child Protective Services, good morning. This is the prosecutor. I need you to make an urgent intervention in a house on Main Street. We have evidence of serious child abuse. The counselor paused, her pen suspended over the paper. Is it by any chance the number of the yellow brownstone? Exactly. How did you know? I just received a complaint about the same house, replied the counselor, looking at the teacher with surprise. Two independent sources. This confirms the severity of the situation. At 2 in the afternoon, a coordinated operation was being set up. The counselor, accompanied by 2 social workers and a court officer, was heading to Main Street. The teacher had offered to accompany the team, using her experience with traumatized children. The millionaire watched everything from his window, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, after days of paralysis, he had managed to act. The lawyer was by his side, both witnessing the moment that would change the girl's life forever. You did the right thing, said the lawyer, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. I hope it's not too late, replied the businessman, his eyes fixed on the team approaching the brownstone. In the house, the aunt had gone out to buy alcohol at the local bar, leaving the girl locked in the stuffy room. The child continued singing softly, unaware that her life was about to change radically. When the counselor knocked on the door of the brownstone and received no answer, she used her legal authority to enter the property. What they found inside surpassed even their worst expectations. A dirty and poorly maintained house, a strong smell of alcohol, and obvious signs of neglect in every room. It was the teacher who first heard the weak voice coming from the room at the back. There's someone here, she said, guiding the team down the hall. When they opened the door to the room and found the girl curled up in the corner singing her sad song, everyone present felt a pang in their heart. The child raised her big, scared eyes, not understanding who those people were or what they wanted from her. Hi, sweetheart, said the counselor, crouching down to be at the child's height. My name is Anna. We're here to help you. The girl looked at the teacher, recognizing the kind lady who had talked to her in the yard. A glimmer of hope shone in her eyes, but was quickly replaced by fear. Auntie's going to be mad, she whispered. You don't need to worry about that now, said the teacher, reaching out her hand to the child. We're going to get you out of here, okay? And so, after 8 months of silent suffering, the girl was finally removed from the house where she had known only pain and fear. Across the street, the millionaire watched through the window as the small figure walked for the first time towards freedom, knowing that his life would never be the same again either. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.